Hi everyone, Ashley here and welcome to another video on my YouTube channel. Today is a fun video because it's a blog hop collaboration between Catherine Pooler and Heffy Doodle. So I was generally gifted some products from both companies in order to do this hop and combine them onto one card, and I think that it was a lot of fun and I hope that you enjoy this video. For more information about the hop, please check down in the video description below. Okay, so I am using 4 colors of Catherine Pooler inks in this video. They are Party Dress, Lime Ricky, Aquatini, and Tiara, which are these beautiful, bright, bold colors. And I did some very basic swatching of these, basically just took the ink pad right to the paper and swatched them out. And this is the color that you get, and I just love how sort of bold and solid these are. These are really bright, really solid. I have actually never used Catherine Pooler inks before, so I was really excited to test these out with one of my favorite techniques. So we'll start getting into that right now. I have my silicone craft mat out so I can do some inking techniques. And I'm just taking each of these ink pads in Aquatini, Tiara, and Party Dress, that's that turquoise, yellow, and pink, and just smushing them directly down onto my craft mat. What I'm going to do next is take a little bit of water with a spray bottle and spray them out and then do an ink smushing technique. So off to the right there I have a piece of white cardstock that I've cut to the same size as an A2 size card, so that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And now that I've sprayed those inks, I am just going to smush this paper directly into them and just kind of move it around a little bit to get a little bit of variation in how the color's applied, and press down with my fingers to really press that paper into the ink. When I do that, you can see that you get this beautiful application of ink onto the paper with very minimal work. So it's a really, really nice technique to get good watercolor effects with not much work. I wanted a little bit more blue, so I just smushed a little bit more blue out onto my craft mat, put some water into it, and then I just put my paper right back into it again. And that just put a little bit more blue onto the panel, which I liked. You'll notice that the panel does start to curl a little bit because it gets really wet, but don't worry, once you kind of put it onto your card and glue it down onto the flat card surface, I found that it was totally fine. Next, I took a piece of white cardstock cut with a grassy border, and I'm doing the same technique here with the Lime Ricky ink. So I smushed the Lime Ricky ink onto my craft surface, sprayed it with water, and now I can just smush this grassy piece right into it to get a really nice watercolory grass look. Now I'm going to do the same thing again on 2 more panels of cardstock because I'm planning to cut out a whole bunch of leaves using some leaf dyes from Heffy Doodle, and I wanted the leaves to have this same watercolor effect. So you'll see in a moment I'm going to take a couple more pieces of white cardstock and use green and yellow ink sort of blended together with the same ink smushing technique. Now, I decided to use this technique because this is a technique that I love. I think it's an age-old technique. I've seen it used so many times in so many different card videos, so I'm certainly not the inventor of this technique, but I do love to use it. It's one of the first inky techniques I ever tried when I was first getting into card making, and I really wanted to see how Catherine Pooler ink sort of held up with this technique. I will say I think that they worked really well. I think that they blended onto the cardstock super nicely once they were mixed with water, and they did create these really beautiful watercolory looks, and they really maintained their brightness, which I really liked. Okay, like I mentioned, I'm taking those 2 rectangular pieces that I had applied that watercolory technique to, and I'm just using a Heffy Doodle die set. This is the Tremendous Peekaboo Tree dies, which comes with a bunch of these sort of separate leaf dies that are kind of small. But they work really nicely to add to the tree to create really nice leaves to kind of make the tree look more full. So I used my little Heffy Doodle die cut machine to cut out a whole bunch of these leaves from these panels that I had a whole bunch to choose from. Actually, I had more that I ended up using, but that's okay, I'll save them for another card. Off camera, I went ahead and stamped out a whole bunch of images from the Gardener's Greeting stamp set by Catherine Pooler, as well as the Nuts About You stamp set by Heffy Doodle, and these are the 2 stamp sets I chose to combine on my card. So those 2 gnomes, as well as the wheelbarrow and some of the other little images, are from the gnome stamp set, and then all of the nuts and a couple of those birds and the bird feeder are from the Heffy Doodle stamp set. I stamped all of these out in Gina K Amalgam ink, which is a really nice black ink for Copic coloring, and I'm coloring them in with my Copic markers. I'm not going to show you the coloring for all of the images because it would take a while, but I am just going to show you how I colored in these gnomes because these actually were new images to me. I've never used this stamp set before, so for me it was really fun to kind of choose how to color these gnomes and what colors I wanted to use on them. I did decide to go with colors that are sort of represented on the card already, so I had used that pink, yellow, turquoise, and green from Catherine Pooler, and that's the colors that I chose to go with for these images too, just to make sure everything sort of worked together. So for the first gnome, I'm coloring their little hat in turquoise and their little outfit in yellow. And then for the second gnome, I'm going to be coloring their little hat in pink and their little outfit in turquoise. For both, I just used some light cool grays on their beard just to add a little bit of shadow, and some browns for their little boots as well. For all of these images, I'm just starting with the darker shade of whatever color I'm using and then blending it out with the lighter shade. So for the little outfit for this gnome, I'm starting with the darker turquoise and then blending it out with the lighter. And I'm just putting the darker in the area where I think the light wouldn't hit, so there would be some shadows, and then blending it out with the lighter to the areas where I think the light would hit more. I'm doing the same technique for this little hat, so again, just using a darker pink to put in the areas where I think there'd be shadows and blending it out with the lighter shades. So once I had colored in all the images, I cut them out using the coordinating dies, and then I can start assembling my card. I'm starting by gluing down that inked panel onto an A2 sized card base that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches, and really holding it down. Like I mentioned, it did warp a little bit with all the water, so you just have to really hold it down for a long time with a lot of glue to make sure that it stays flat. I did the same thing for the grassy piece at the bottom as well. And I really love how that inked piece creates a really nice colorful sky for the background. Next, I took one of the squirrels that I had stamped from the Nuts About You Heffy Doodle stamp set, and I glued the squirrel onto a little piece of brown cardstock that I had cut with the wood grain texture die by Heffy Doodle to give it that wood grain stitched texture look. I then glued this tree that I also cut out of brown cardstock and cut with the Heffy Doodle wood grain texture die, again to give it that wood grain textured look. And I just glued that straight onto the piece with the squirrel so that when you pull that peekaboo up, you see the squirrel behind. That peekaboo, by the way, that peekaboo die that kind of makes that little flap that you lift up, that comes in the same die set. So it's a Heffy Doodle die set called Tremendous Peekaboo Tree Dies that comes with that tree, the little peekaboo, as well as all the leaves that you saw me cutting out earlier. Then that wood grain texture die is actually a separate background die that you can use to add that wood grain texture to really any shape or image that you want, which is really nice. So I glued that little gnome behind the tree and then glued them both down onto the panel. And now I'm stamping out the sentiment, which comes from the Heffy Doodle Nuts About You stamp set. It just says, "I'm nuts about you," and I just stamped that in black ink directly onto the inked panel. Now, I should have mentioned before that in the original stamp set, the original Catherine Pooler Gardener's Greetings stamp set, this wheelbarrow image actually comes with a whole bunch of flowers in it. I actually masked them off when I was stamping so that I only stamped out the wheelbarrow portion because I knew that I wanted to fill it with nuts. So I'm taking all of these nuts that I had stamped, colored, and cut out from the Heffy Doodle Nuts About You stamp set, and I'm gluing them together to create this pile in the wheelbarrow. So this is a really neat idea for this wheelbarrow image. You don't have to stamp it as its original form with the flowers. You can mask off the flowers and stamp whatever you want on the inside, which really kind of tailors it to any kind of card that you'd want. Or of course you can stamp it with the flowers as it was originally intended as well. I took some foam squares and put them behind the wheelbarrow as well as that second gnome, and I just stuck them straight onto the ground on the card. I then laid out all these leaves, kind of arranged them onto the tree how I wanted them to look, and then I'm gluing them down onto the card panel, alternating between foam and glue so that some of the leaves are elevated and some are stuck straight down. I just thought this gave it kind of a nice little bit of interest. I also stuck down that little bird feeder in the top right branch, and finally I can put this little bird just sitting on the wheel of the wheelbarrow looking at the nuts, which I thought was really cute. I also added a couple little pieces of stamped grass to the bottom, and that is the card. So I really love how this card integrates these two companies' products really, really well. That Gardener's Greetings stamp set goes really well with the Nuts About You stamp set because they're both very woodland themed and they fit really well together. I really like the colors of the Catherine Pooler inks that I tried as well, and I'm excited to try more. I hope that you enjoyed watching this video. If you did, please feel free to check out the other videos on my channel, as well as head over to my Instagram account where I post more cards. It's all linked in the video description below. Also, please check there to keep hopping along and seeing the rest of the cards on this blog hop. Thanks for watching. Bye!